I'm Keith Schneider. I'm a global correspondent for Circle of Blue, which is a Michigan-based news organization, news science organization that covers the conflict between water, energy, food, and the era of climate change on every continent. And I've reported on these issues on 5 continents.
Excellent, excellent. And you are formerly with the New York Times, is that correct?
Yeah, I'm a former national correspondent with the New York Times and a contributor to the New York Times Continuing.
Hmm.
Write about energy, write about cities, urban development, write about science, communications, art, business, and have been writing for the Times since 1981.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay, so you have just come from India,
yeah.
and one of the questions that we've heard is, okay, maybe the U.S. and China will sort of start getting their act together, but India is coming on strong. You've mentioned some of the same barriers in India. What are they doing there? We hear conflicting reports about how they're implementing maybe solar energy, but then maybe not. What can you tell us about that?
Well, India is now using over 800 million metric tons of coal a year, and its consumption is going up about 50 million metric tons, maybe a little more, 70 million metric tons. India is only capable of producing in 2014 558 million metric tons of the more than 800 that they're using. So they're importing more coal, and they're importing more coal from Australia principally and from Indonesia. The new Panama Canal will open in 2016, according to the most current estimates of when they're completed. So it's entirely possible that India could be importing our eastern and western coal down the Ohio River, down the Mississippi River, through New Orleans, through the new Panama Canal, which is much bigger and much more capable of taking these very large coal container ships to India. That's one factor in the Panama Canal situation. Um, India India's response to the U.S.-China climate agreement was interesting. They were very critical of it, not for what it said, but the fact that China and the United States negotiated on their own when the rest of the world was trying to negotiate an international global climate pact at these annual UN global climate agreements that are taking place around the world every year, and that the China and the U.S. kind of went on their own and sort of they saw it as a slight to the rest of the world, which I thought was pretty interesting. As
Uh,
why are these two big guys doing this alone when we've been trying to do this collaboratively as a family, and they're acting on their own. I thought that was pretty interesting. India, India is its own mess. India is a mess environmentally. It's a mess economically, and it's a mess, in my view, principally because it has sought to achieve over the last 35 years a Western high energy, high consumption, high cost, high water use economy. It wanted to duplicate the Western, U.S. economy and the China economy. It never will be able to do that. It's not going to be able to do that. It's made some progress in it, but it just doesn't generate enough energy to do that. I'll give you a couple numbers. The U.S. generates 1,000 gigawatts of electricity a year. China now generates about 1,150 gigawatts of electricity a year. India's utilities generate 237 gigawatts, and they're only generating 10 to 12 more additional gigawatts annually over the last 10 years. The average 10 to 12. So if you put 10 to 12 and between 237 and 1,000 is, what is that, 700, let's say it's 800 gigs, so put 12 into 800, you're 80 years away. And
mhm.
it's the same, they're 80 years away. And they have been pushing their energy sector as hard as India is capable of pushing an energy sector. They've developed more solar power. They've developed 29,000 megawatts of wind power. But most of their power comes from coal. They have small nuclear sector. And they push it. And, a third of their electricity is lost or stolen, that which they're already generating. So they have an economy that's now, endemic blackouts, endemic brownouts, very tough for business to operate there. And so what India needs to do, in my view, is to focus hard on its condition and to improve its conditions. The conditions of its cities, which are grimy and dirty and litter bound and polluted. The conditions of its countryside, which is dug up and littered and disaggregated. I mean, they're wrecking their countryside. The condition of their water. You know, they treat less than 5% of their wastewater. So their rivers are just filthy. You know, they have resource policies that are nuts, like free energy and free water to their farmers. Well, 700 million of their people are involved in the agriculture sector, so they're wasting a tremendous amount of electricity. They're draining their water supplies, and they're producing these endemic surpluses that don't reach anybody. They're piled in huge grain depots in Punjab and Haryana. So I love India. It's the favorite place I've been. I love going there. The people are tremendous, the warmth, the charisma, the intelligence that country has, and they're just stepping on themselves trying to mimic a Western growth pattern, and they shouldn't. What they have now, right now, after 35 years of trying like hell, to generate more power and to build their cities and to have their cities gleam, what they really have is an economy that is much lower resource intensive. Much lower energy intensive, right? They're at the almost a sustainability foundations that they need to just fix their conditions. And yeah, they need more electricity, but to drive so hard to wreck their countryside in order to try to develop 1,000 gigawatts instead of 300, or make those the goal, and then distribute it on much more modern transmission lines, and then decentralize it to the 350, 400,000 villagers that don't even have electricity.
Sure.
And make them decentralized. I mean, they have this opportunity to totally leapfrog into the 21st century economy. Totally. Right. Put aside this Western high energy, high water, high consumption, high cost economy, which, by the way, is a 20th century. It's a 20th century concept. That's not working in the 21st century. It's too costly, too intensive, not sustainable. It's one of the reasons that in the United States and in Western Europe we're having such trouble politically, because we don't want to pay for it.
Right.
All of a sudden we decide it's too expensive. We don't want to pay for it. We don't pay for the roads. We want to pay for the upgrades. Well, India's not there. They're a foundation at a different level, and they need to figure what I call the new India. What is the new 21st century India going to be? Well, if it's going to be more efficient use of energy, lower inputs, lower energy inputs, lower water, clean up their water, but lower water intensity, lower resource intensity, they're already there. Yeah. They just need to modernize it and figure out how to decentralize and get it into more people's hands to build the well-being of more people. But they do not need to mimic, the West's focus, dogma about getting rich and getting richer by having more things, and which is what we're doing in the United States, right? That's what we're doing. Yeah, India needs to be part of the process, and they're going to say, well, if we do that, we're going to impede our economic development. And my response is, your economic development is already impeded by how much of a mess you've made of your country, and it's already impeding and their economic, their GDP continues to ratchet down. It was in the first decade of the 21st century, when India was thought to be, the next big China, the next big global market. Which is nonsense. Since then, its GDP has been declining, and it's declining because they've made such a mess of their country.
Wow.
You really can't live there. I mean, Westerners won't live there. Western standards, people will not live there. It's too dirty. It's just too dirty, too grimy, too much pollution. The water, the air, the land, they are ruining their country, trying to catch up, and they never will with China and the United States, and they're never going to be able to do it. And now the conditions, the decrepit water, air, land, I mean, just how the deteriorated conditions of India are now an impediment to their economic development. And they're becoming an impediment to China's economic development.